This is part 12 of JavaScript with ASP.NET tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss how to warn the user before leaving web page with unsaved changes. Let's understand this with an example. Here is what we want to do. We want to have a web form with a text box control and a save button. When this web form is first loaded, the save button must be disabled as there is nothing to save on this form. As we start to type in the text box control, the save button must be enabled because now there is some data to be saved within the text box control. So at this point, if we try to close the browser or refresh the page by hitting F5 key, or if we try to navigate to another page by changing the URL in the address bar, then we should get a warning message similar to this stating that we have unsaved data on the page. If we have some data to save in the text box control, and when we hit the save button, the data should be saved, and when the page reloads, the text box should be empty and the save button must be disabled. If there is nothing to save within the text box control, and when we try to close or refresh or navigate to a different URL, no warning message should be displayed because there is nothing to save. So this functionality is very similar to what we have in Facebook. When you log into Facebook and when you type something into the post text box, and if you try to close the browser without posting that message, you will get a warning message similar to this. So let's see how to implement this functionality within ASP.NET Web Forms application. So let's flip to Visual Studio. Let's drag and drop a text box control first. We want this text box control to be multi-line text box, so I'm going to set text mode to multi-line. Let's set rows equals 5 and columns equals 30. Let's include 2 break elements and a button control. We want the text on the button to be saved, and when the web form is first loaded, we want the button to be disabled. So let's set disabled attribute to true. And then let's flip this web form to the design mode. Let's double click on this button control to generate the server-side click event handler. So within this click event handler, we usually will have our ADO.NET code to save the data to the DB. And then once we have saved our data to the database, we want to empty the text box. So I'm going to set the text box to an empty string. Now when this web form reloads, after we save the data to the database, and when the web form reloads, since we have set this disabled attribute to true, the button will be automatically disabled anyway. Let's include a section for script. Let's create a variable. Let's name this changes saved, and let's initialize this to true. Let's write a function now. Let's name this has pending changes, and inside this function, changes saved equals document.getElement by ID, and we want the ID of the text box control. Dot value dot length double equals 0. We'll discuss what this code is doing in just a bit. So document.getElement by ID, we want the button control as well. Button1 dot disabled equals whatever value we have in changes saved variable. So what's going on here? So this is basically a Boolean expression. This is going to return either true or false depending on whether we have characters or not within the text box control. If the length property returns 0, then this expression is going to return true. That means we don't have anything within the text box control to save. So changes saved will be true. There's nothing to save, right? So if changes saved is true, then we want the button to be disabled. So that's why we are setting disabled equals changes saved. So if changes saved is true, then the button remains disabled because there is nothing to save. On the other hand, if length is greater than 0, then that means there is something within the text box control. So this expression is going to return false. If it returns false, this variable will have that value, false, and disabled equals false, meaning the button will be enabled. Okay, and we want to call this function on key up event of the text box control. So on key up equals has pending changes. Now when we try to close the browser, there is an event that is fired, window.on before unload. We want to write some code to respond to that event. So window.on before unload equals, we want to execute a function. So inside this function, if not changes saved. That means if we have something to change, then we want to return this message to the user. You haven't saved your changes. Alright, so let's go ahead and test this. Let's view the page in the browser. So look at this, when the web form first loads, the text box is empty, the button is disabled. And since we don't have anything to save, when we close the browser, what's going to happen? This event will be fired, right? So when this event fires, this variable is checked. And if you look at this variable, we have true there. If not of true, that expression will be false. That means it's not going to return this message, and the browser will silently close. Look at that, when I close the browser, it silently closes without any confirmation. Let's reload the page. Now look at this, as we start to type into the text box, the button is enabled now. Okay, so since we have typed some characters within the text box control, this variable will now be false because we have some data within the text box control and we haven't saved it yet. Now if this is false, and when we try to close the browser, this event is fired. So it comes here, it checks, okay, if not false, that will be true, and when that is true, we get this message. Look at that. So when I close the browser, we get the message, are you sure you want to leave this page? And we have two options, leave this page or stay on this page. When I select stay on this page, we are going to stay on the page and we don't lose our changes. Similarly, when I try to refresh this page, you can refresh this browser either by pressing F5 key or simply by, clicking in the address bar and then hitting the enter key. Look at that, we get the same message again. And when we'll select stay on this page, we stay on this page. Similarly, when we try to navigate to a different site, I again get the same message. When I select leave this page, we will be redirected to Dell.com. Now let's reload this page. Now when we have some data within the text box control to save, and then when we click this save button, what should happen? That data should be saved to the database. But look at what is going to happen. We are actually getting this message again. Are you sure you want to leave this page? Actually, when we click this save button, we don't want this message to show up. And the reason this message is showing up, because technically we are leaving the page when the page posts back. And at that point, this event is raised. And since we have data in the text box control, this variable will be false and that returns true, so it's going to return that message. But what we want to do is when we click the save button, we want to suppress this message. So how are we going to do that? Using a JavaScript function again. Now when we click this save button, there are two click events, client side click event and the server side click event. On the client side click event, what we are going to do is simply set this variable to true. So let's write that function on submit client click. So inside this function, we are going to set changes saved equals true, and then we will call this function on client click of this button. On client click equals that function. Alright, so let's go ahead, close this page, and look at this. When we type something and then when we click save button, now we don't get the warning message. The page posts back, reloads, the text box is empty, the button is disabled. And here is the code that we have just discussed. Thank you for listening and have a great day.